Homage to Buddha Shakyamuni, homage to Manjushri, homage to all the lineage masters. Profound and subtle dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we can follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate all sentient beings, please generate unsurpassed bodhicitta. Yesterday we finished the earlier section on samaya. Today we begin the subject of accomplishment. This accomplishment is a little different from the practice we spoke of before. Here it refers mainly to certain traditions and ritual manuals of great accomplishment found in Tibetan Buddhism. But among monasteries and practitioners today, these traditions of great accomplishment are now practiced only very rarely. Some of the practices in different monasteries and sanghas today are quite similar. Now let me explain the principle behind this. What we are covering today is accomplishment. Among the 11 topics of Tantra, accomplishment is the 7th topic. It is explained in the same way as the previous topics. Accomplishment has 4 parts. First, the nature. Second, the divisions. Third, the manner of accomplishment. Fourth, the purpose. First is the nature. As for this nature, the root verse puts it this way. The verse says, if practice is without weariness, discouragement, sloth, or doubt, all mandalas will be accomplished and the supremely sacred secret Vajra will be achieved. So what is accomplishment? In fact, the most basic prerequisite for accomplishment is that beforehand there be no weariness, no sloth, no discouragement. Toward the Dharma we practice and the Master who gives us these teachings, we should not keep holding on to doubts, wrong views, and conceptual thoughts. If we do, then we will not achieve any accomplishment in our practice. Whatever Dharma we practice, we must not be lazy. As for laziness, the way of the Bodhisattva speaks of 3 kinds of laziness. Some are diligent all day long but clinging to worldly affairs. In fact, this is a kind of laziness too. Some people run themselves down thinking someone like me could never practice at all. They feel a kind of contempt toward themselves. And there is another kind of person who spends all day just killing time, drifting through the hours, always drifting along as if nothing mattered at all. A while ago, some of my schoolmates told me that they had been sitting in a tea house talking about their classmates. One classmate said, I heard Sodargye is doing pretty well these days. I was not really sure what he meant. Maybe he meant that I had become lazy. In this world, people sometimes simply drift through life without clarity or direction. They do not really practice, apply what they have learned, or accomplish anything meaningful. This is a form of laziness and distraction too. For a practitioner, this is a big obstacle. Actually, compared with my classmates, I was probably a bit more diligent. But they think I'm very lazy. The worst thing of all in practice is discouragement. Truly, all of you here from now on, whether in your practice or in anything else you do, should never give up, but keep persevering. Whatever you do, if you abandon it halfway, that is truly a pity. Worldly people are the same way. Indeed, sometimes by simply persevering and not giving up, one can eventually achieve something remarkable. So in our practice, some of us have chosen to go forth and become monastics. Once you have entered monastic life, do not abandon this path of renunciation. Some have become lay practitioners of Buddhism, so do not abandon that path either. Some have already taken refuge in the 3 jewels and studied the secret mantra, so do not abandon these. Do not reach a certain point and start thinking, maybe this path is not right, or maybe that one is not right. Fear, suffering, heartbreak, behaving in such ways is a rather large obstacle when it comes to practice. So we must not be discouraged. This is very important. And as I just mentioned, we should not have doubts or waver in our commitment to the Dharma we practice. Today doubting this, tomorrow forming a wrong view about that. This is also a great obstacle to your accomplishment. In fact, many people fail to accomplish the secret teachings simply because doubts arise in their minds. His Holiness, Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, often used to say this too, especially for those practicing the secret teachings. When it comes to certain special deities and certain special pith instructions, you must never think, if I practice this way, will anything come of it? Will it actually work? Is there anything to it? Is there really such a deity at all? If you think this way and remain in a state of doubt and uncertainty, then not to speak of a Buddhist accomplishment, even a worldly accomplishment is very hard to reach. When we do something while constantly doubting it, it is very difficult to succeed. So once these several conditions are present, all mandalas are accomplished, whatever dharma one practices. This mandala, in terms of its meaning, also points to all accomplishment. And then one gains the profound secret intent of the Vajra. The quote continues, there is the approach and the close approach, the accomplishment and the great accomplishment. What we are speaking of is the four branches of approach and accomplishment, which we will also explain below. Approach divides into the approach and the close approach. Accomplishment divides into the accomplishment and the great accomplishment. Altogether, there are four branches. Now, as for what accomplishment means, the Sanskrit word sadhana is translated as fully partaking. So by achieving one's goal, it will either be attained or accomplished, which is called an accomplishment. We often say, we are practicing, I am a practitioner. So what is accomplishment? Accomplishment is this. You want to attain something, you are willing to attain it, and you strive for it. Or you could say, you wish to gain the meaning you pursue. In fact, there are both worldly practices and transcendent practices. We often say, I am a practitioner. I often ask people, are you a practitioner? Many people say, I am not a practitioner. But you cannot say that. If you are not a practitioner, then you don't even have a goal to pursue. In that case, whether we speak in the broad sense or the narrow sense, for instance, every day I recite the heart mantra of Padma Sambhava. This is an act of accomplishment too. Alternatively, the term siddhi means actual attainment. The siddhi accomplished through various stages that are to be attained is what is meant by actual attainment, or siddhi, through all sorts of ways, some reciting mantras, some visualizing, and some through certain other activities. Do we not often say that even when we face some adversity or obstacle, these too can be part of our accomplishment? Many practitioners in the Kadampa tradition say that life itself is nothing but accomplishment. In other words, every aspect of life can become part of the accomplishment. Whether you accomplish something or fail to, whether you're happy or unhappy, it can all become part of your accomplishment. Even if you spend every day crying loudly and shouting, this too could be called a good accomplishment. The louder your cries become, the higher your level of accomplishment is said to be. This is simply expressed by the name of attainment, or siddhi. In other words, this is the objective to accomplish. So what is the nature of accomplishment? Its nature is that through the exceptional methods of secret mantra, the goal of accomplishing whatever is desired, common and supreme, siddhis occurs through the stages of approach and accomplishment. So then, what is the nature of accomplishment? As I see it here, one aspect is that when accomplishment is joined with the Sanskrit word, it carries the sense of accomplishment and the sense of fully partaking. In this way, accomplishment comes through various methods and approaches. When one applies a method to attain the result one seeks, this itself is called accomplishment. In that case, we too can all be called practitioners. Through fully partaking, if we wish to gain some result, to gain some meaning we seek, this too may be called accomplishment. Then its nature, because what is spoken of here is the practice of the secret mantra, not the practice of the sutra vehicle. The secret mantra, through its own supreme skillful methods, such as the completion stage, the generation stage, or some other approach, can directly and freely accomplish the result one seeks. It is either the common siddhi, the common accomplishment, the so-called miraculous powers in the world, or gaining wealth, attaining status, and so on. These worldly accomplishments, this too is a kind of accomplishment. And there is the supreme accomplishment, the fruition states of the Shravaka, the Pratika Buddha, the Bodhisattva, and the Buddha. That is the transcendent, the fruition of freedom from samsara. So when we summarize the essence of all these accomplishments, they are all encompassed within the four branches of approach and accomplishment. All actions included within these four branches of approach and accomplishment can be called accomplishment. Therefore, for those of us gathered here, I hope that through this introduction to the secret mantra of the Guhya Garbha Tantra, you will develop a genuine aspiration for accomplishment from now on. This is very important. What is the major difference between practitioners and academic researchers today? We don't simply study and analyze theories, but at the same time focus on how we can put the meaning of those theories into practice. This is the most fundamental characteristic of a practitioner. Nowadays, many university professors and intellectuals may understand certain principles on the level of theory or of research, but deep down they may not have truly experienced or understood it themselves. For example, impermanence of life or the four branches of approach and accomplishment, they may only talk about them in theory and have never truly reflected on them. The divisions have two parts. First, the general explanation. Second, the specific explanation of the exceptional accomplishment gathering. The general explanation has four parts. Among them, the first is division based upon the objective to accomplish. If based upon the objective to accomplish, there are two. the common and supreme siddhis. For the common, there are both lesser and greater activities. The lesser activities generally refer to abilities such as miraculous powers, the divine eye, and the ability to know others' minds, which are subtle lesser activity accomplishments attained through practice. Even ordinary worldly matters such as longevity or gaining wealth, when such goals are achieved through practice, this is also called the accomplishment of lesser activities, then the accomplishment of greater activity. In fact, beyond the activities accomplished within this present life, one can also liberate beings in the desire or form realms, relying on the status of a Vidyadhara. Through this, one manifests their qualities and level of realization. This is called greater activity. For the Supreme Siddhi, there are two, the temporary and the ultimate. As mentioned earlier, temporary accomplishments refer to Vidyadhara levels like the matured Vidyadhara and the Vidyadhara with power over life and so on. The ultimate accomplishment is in fact the spontaneously present Vidyadhara. There are four types of Vidyadharas. We have already covered this when explaining the meaning of the Tantra in chapter 1. Accomplishments of this kind are all called supreme accomplishment. According to the common, practices such as resuscitation of the dead, longevity, mirror divination, and so forth are taught. After practice, there is the accomplishment of resuscitating the dead, and longevity, living 100 years or more, and mirror divination. Mirror divination is like telling fortunes or casting lots. After practice, through one's own eyes, one can see within the phenomena of interdependence, discovering this person's future circumstances in various respects. One can use mirror divination, using the mirror divining eye. In Tibetan Buddhism, this is a very effective way to observe things. Through such methods, one can accomplish common siddhis. Supreme siddhis are accomplished through Vajrasattva, the accomplishment gathering, Dharma medicine accomplishment, and others. As by practicing Vajrasattva or by practicing certain accomplishment gatherings, one gains the Vidyadhara state. By practicing the method of the medicine Buddha, in the end one gains these fruition states of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This is called Supreme Siddhi. What we spoke of just now was the division by the way of the objective to accomplish. That just now should be the division based upon the objective to accomplish. Second, division based upon the supports. If distinctions are based upon supports, there are various outer material substances, inner mantra recitation, abiding in samadhi, and physical exertion such as the ways of gazing and the like. In reliance upon these four, siddhis will be accomplished. This relies on certain outer material substances. First, there are implements of practice, such as a mala, a prayer wheel, or a vajra dagger equipped with various sacred substances of secret mantra. Next is the speech practice of reciting mantras, such as the longevity mantra or medicine Buddha mantra, to avert misfortune and extend life. And the mind abiding in samadhi. Of course, there are a great many kinds of samadhi. And the physical exertion of gazing and the like accomplished through these four kinds of practice. Each of these can have 2, 3, 4, or limitless individual distinctions. The meaning is this: as for the divisions of our accomplishment, if we divide by the supports, some are accomplished by mantra, some relying on samadhi, some relying on various substances. For instance, within pacifying, increasing, magnetizing, and subjugating, there may be some. One must be furnished with the various malas, mandalas, and implements for pacifying, increasing, magnetizing, and subjugating, and recite mantra, visualize, and at the same time form certain mudras, along with specific gazes and physical postures to carry out the practice. For example, in Kongtrul Rinpoche's Treasury of Pith Instructions, there are empowerment rituals that include empowerment methods from the 8 great lineages of Tibetan region. Each time the Vajra master conferred an empowerment, he would use different ritual items. For instance, when conferring a Kagyu empowerment, he would wear their specific hat. When conferring a Nyingma or Geluk empowerment, the Vajra master would also use different bodily postures to perform the empowerment, form the mudras, and use the ritual implements. Perhaps for various reasons, we used to have very little material on this. We did not have access to the empowerment methods of the great lineages or to some of the major treasure and teaching rituals. But in general, we should know that some practices rely on different supports. For example, we often speak of holding a prayer wheel or holding a mala. These are practices that rely on certain supports. Sometimes supports recitation, visualization, and bodily postures such as joining the palms are all needed. In that case, all four supports are complete. In some cases, there is only mantra recitation and reliance on ritual implements, so two supports are present. In some cases, there are three supports: visualizing in the mind, reciting mantras aloud, and relying on certain ritual supports. Some practices include two supports, some include three, and some include four. In short, there are many different situations. If we divide them further, for example, within the four activities of pacifying, increasing, magnetizing, and subjugating, there is the pacifying activity of eliminating illness. Within this activity of eliminating illness, there are many different mantras to recite. Mifam Rinpoche has a special treasury of mantras. In it, for instance, it explains which mantra to recite for this illness and which mantra to recite for that illness. Magnetizing activity can also be divided into many different kinds. If we analyze them in detail, the classifications become extremely numerous. Nevertheless, if substances alone are relied upon, then even the accomplishment of subtle enlightened activity is not fully qualified, although it may be referred to as accomplishment. We rely on certain mantras and certain sacred objects, using the different sacred objects of pacifying, increasing, magnetizing, and subjugating to accomplish activities. In name, this may be referred to as accomplishment. For example, by reciting Vajrasattva's heart mantra with a crystal mala, one can pacify the misdeeds within one's own mind stream. So simply relying on a sacred object to accomplish a lesser activity may appear to be accomplishment on the surface, but it is not authentic accomplishment. What is the authentic accomplishment taught in the Garbha Tantra? Its requirement is rather high. Among the 11 topics of Tantra, authentic accomplishment refers to the exceptional methods that easily and quickly produce the ultimate result. The level of accomplishment discussed here is therefore very high. It is explained from the perspective of the highest accomplishment, the attainment of liberation. So, as ordinary beings, when we practice in our daily lives, we may generally be called practitioners. For example, if we hold a mala, can that be called accomplishment? In a general sense, yes. But the accomplishment taught among the 11 topics of Tantra has much higher requirements. Even so, when lesser activities are sustained with exceptional methods and prajna, such as compassion and so forth, they too become branches of the perfectly correct path. For example, when we engage in a lesser activity, if it is supported by great compassion and sustained by the wisdom of non-dual emptiness, can such an action become a branch of the perfectly correct path? We can indeed say that it can. But if such a practice is carried out under the influence of attachment, arrogance, wrong views, or jealousy, then it not only fails to become a cause of the correct path, but may also create negative karma. Some people recite mantras while at the same time giving rise to anger and hatred toward others. There is a Tibetan saying about this: reciting the Avalokiteshvara mantra with a harmful mind is worse than resting peacefully with a good heart. This means that reciting the Avalokiteshvara mantra with a harmful mind is not as good as simply resting with a good heart. In that case, it is better not to recite the mantra. Some people become very angry and start reciting mantras, turning their prayer wheels, making them spin with a humming sound. Such behavior is worse than simply resting with a calm mind. Even if you are not reciting with your mouth and are not holding a prayer wheel in your hand, it may actually be a little better. Once, when Khenpo Tsultrim Lodro was carrying out a life release practice, he saw a local man selling a truckload of yaks. He was sitting in the driver's seat holding a prayer wheel and turning it. That yak seller was holding a prayer wheel in his hand while selling the yaks. I once heard about such a case. It is truly frightening. On the surface, it appears that he is holding a prayer wheel and reciting prayers, but in reality, he is engaged in killing and slaughtering yaks. So, generally speaking, a virtuous mind is extremely important. Here, if lesser activities are sustained with compassion and similar qualities, they can also become a path of accomplishment. Since such activities may be necessary, it is temporarily acceptable to accomplish them, because for the time being we may also have certain needs, such as curing illness or gaining wealth. Some worldly practices are also necessary for temporary purposes. So it is not that these accomplishments cannot be done. They can indeed be accomplished. For example, when some elderly monks give blessings, they may simply use a stick. They may say, May you gain wealth, gain great wealth, and so on. So for temporary needs, it is possible to make aspirations for wealth. And it is also possible to make aspirations for healing illness. When we go to monasteries, some people may have rather high expectations. Some people who study Tibetan Buddhism say that if something is not sustained by bodhicitta, then one should not make such aspirations because they are all unwholesome. Of course, both the 7 points of mind training and opening the door to mind training explain that if one is sustained by worldly thoughts, then even study, reflection, and practice of Dharma can become causes for the 3 lower realms. There is indeed such a statement, but in fact, this is speaking from a very strict perspective. Ordinary people probably cannot do this. People in the world naturally care about their health. They care very much about the harmony and safety of their families. They care very much about keeping their bodies free from illness and maintaining good health. In these areas, Secret Mantra also has many treasure practices. So as far as temporary needs are concerned, these accomplishments are not impossible to do. They can indeed be accomplished. This is also what the greatly compassionate Buddha has brought to beings as an especially beneficial, skillful means. One may wonder what the difference is between enlightened activity and accomplishment. Enlightened activity is included within accomplishment, and there is the difference from the perspective of accomplishment as the method and enlightened activity as that method's outcome. Because as for accomplishment, whatever the accomplishment, it really only serves as the cause. Through accomplishment, in the end, one can accomplish the activities of pacifying, increasing, magnetizing, and subjugating. So Patrul Rinpoche also said in his general meaning of the ornament of clear realization, in the brief account of the stages of practice, that our accomplishment is not for our own enjoyment, but for the benefit of sentient beings. This is also how we should carry out our accomplishment. What then is the purpose of our accomplishment? It is to benefit sentient beings in the future. Some Dharma friends among us may say, I don't want to make the aspiration to benefit sentient beings, I just want to accomplish. But in fact, accomplishment should be the cause, and benefiting sentient beings should be the result. If we have truly gained some level of accomplishment and we now have the opportunity to benefit beings, then what is the ultimate purpose of our accomplishment? It is not like some university students nowadays, after finishing their exams, think, when will I finally pass? When will I be able to use my own intelligence to make my life truly happy? When can I buy a house? When can I buy a car? When will I have a truly wonderful family? Nowadays, many educated people set their goals simply for their own enjoyment. But Mahayana practice, whether in the sutra tradition or secret mantra, whatever the case, one practices for the sake of enlightened activity. Enlightened activity arises from skillful means, and accomplishment itself is the skillful means. The two are connected through cause and effect. Likewise, although both are included within conduct, whether enlightened activity or accomplishment, generally speaking, both of them are included within conduct of secret mantra. The conduct of secret mantra is the general dharma. Accomplishment and enlightened activity are its specific dharmas, 2 different dharmas within conduct. There are general and specific distinctions that are understood to be based upon the way they are synthesized and distinguished. Sometimes accomplishment and enlightened activity can be understood as cause and result, with one giving rise to the other. Sometimes both of them can be included within conduct. This way of classifying and synthesizing must be understood. Some practitioners in the Han region nowadays do not understand this, and because they do not grasp how to distinguish and synthesize, all sorts of problems arise, and they cannot even resolve them on their own. At first it is a doubt, and slowly it turns into wrong view. In the end, they abandon the sublime dharma of themselves and others through wrong view, which truly is dangerous. Therefore, for those who practice the Guhyagarbha Tantra, whether for oneself or others, it may appear on the surface to be a very simple teaching, but in fact we need to understand these methods of summarizing and integrating the teachings. Third, the division according to the nature. If determined according to the nature, there are 2, accomplishment based upon the generation stage and upon the completion stage. We have already introduced this earlier, and we can also return to it later. In general, all practices of secret mantra can be summarized as the generation stage and the completion stage. The completion stage includes the completion stage with signs and the completion stage without signs. Within the completion stage without signs, many practices of the great perfection are included. Therefore, about 10 years ago, we taught the later chapters of Finding Comfort and Ease in the Nature of Mind. In those chapters, some of the signless methods of the Great Perfection are specifically explained. In fact, after receiving such a teaching, you should practice it over the long term. Once again, I hope that all of you, after receiving a teaching, will never abandon it throughout your life. If you spent a great deal of time and effort to receive this teaching, but after receiving it, because you did not properly enter into its practice, you eventually abandon it, I feel that would be truly a pity. In our lives, human life itself is short. Within this short life, to encounter such a teaching and practice, it is extremely rare. This is also your own choice. No one is forcing you. For example, in some prisons today, inmates are required to study certain things because it is mandated by the authorities. We are not like that. Whether to listen to the Dharma or not is entirely your own free choice. Since you have the freedom to choose and you have already begun listening, if after listening you do not continue, then in fact there is something wrong with our own way of thinking and our initial motivation. There is still some problem with it. So whatever Dharma you receive, you should personally feel that this is a Dharma with which I have a connection in this life. I should cherish it and continue practicing it. And whatever kind of guru you have relied upon, and whatever Dharma friends you have, you should also consider that in this life, these are people with whom I have a connection and I should continue relying on them well. Doing so will benefit you and will bring no harm whatsoever. Fourth, the division according to the way accomplishment occurs. If determined according to the way accomplishment occurs, there are two, the approach and the accomplishment. Along with that, if each is determined by cause and effect, when divided by the way of accomplishment, it is first divided into the approach and the accomplishment. The approach is in fact the preliminary. The accomplishment is like a main practice. There are 4 branches for the approach and accomplishment: the approach, close approach, accomplishment, and the great accomplishment. Below comes the specific explanation of the exceptional accomplishment gathering. It is divided according to the principle of the 4 branches of approach and accomplishment. One may wonder why this accomplishment is referred to as exceptional. Why does it say here that the exceptional accomplishment gathering is called exceptional? Why is it spoken of as the exceptional accomplishment? Because this accomplishment is a rather special way of practicing within secret mantra. The reason is that it is sublime by way of cause, nature, and result, these 3. First, the blessings are surpassing based on how siddhis are accomplished through the simultaneous gathering of male and female practitioners who have acquired all necessary outer substances and attained inner strength. Within secret mantra, there is accomplishment gathering. But this accomplishment gathering, for example, includes our present Vidyadhara Dharma Assembly and Vajrasattva Dharma Assembly, which are somewhat similar to it, but they are not the truly exceptional accomplishment gathering. Because a truly exceptional accomplishment gathering can be said to directly manifest the state of no more learning immediately from the path of preparation onward, or it can be regarded as a special accomplishment within the bodhisattva path. This is what is mainly being explained here. As for us now, most of us appear to be ordinary beings. We rely on secret mantra rituals in our accomplishment. Can this be called a kind of accomplishment? Yes, it can. But can it be called an exceptional accomplishment gathering? It cannot. A truly exceptional accomplishment gathering surpasses ordinary accomplishment in 3 respects. First, as we will explain below, this kind of accomplishment requires all the necessary substances, including offerings, wealth, medicines, and other materials, to be fully gathered. These are the outer conditions. The inner condition is the yogis who take part in the approach and accomplishment. Their level of accomplishment is quite high, at least at the path of preparation or above. They are practitioners who are highly accomplished in both the generation stage and the completion stage. Through gathering together and relying on the power of this accomplishment, they not only never break their vows or give rise to their own inherent afflictions, but also, through the power of this accomplishment, within a very short time, they manifest the fruition of secret mantra. This is the first aspect of its surpassing quality. Second, results can be achieved without hindrance since there is continuous effort applied toward the four branches of approach and accomplishment. Because they practice together continuously for roughly 9 days, 36 days, or even 6 months, through practicing together in this way, they ultimately attain the state of a vidyadhara without any obstacles. This is the surpassing quality in terms of nature. Third, the state of an immaculate vidyadhara will be attained. In the end, they accomplish the immaculate state of a vidyadhara, and this is very high. One can say they have already attained the state of a Mahamudra Vidyadhara, or a spontaneously present Vidyadhara. It is an immaculate kind of Vidyadhara. For an accomplishment gathering in group formation like this, the practice begins in the context of the 5 fully endowed circumstances. The actual practice is maintained with the 4 branches of approach and accomplishment, and the result is the swift accomplishment of the state of the 4 Vidyadharas within 36 days or more. Below this principle will be explained. First, what does it mean that the practice begins in the context of the 5 fully endowed circumstances? The 5 fully endowed circumstances are the place, time, teacher, retinue, and substances. Formerly, among other lists of 5 endowments, there was the endowment of Dharma. Here he calls it the endowment of substances. Among them, the first means any auspicious place with an excellent location that is free of obstacles. As I mentioned just now, although the kind of accomplishment we practice now cannot be called the exceptional accomplishment gathering, because the exceptional accomplishment gathering refers to the practice of an assembly of vidyadharas on the path of preparation and above, the kind of accomplishment we practice now, whether it is a personal retreat of 7 days or 5 days, or everyone gathering together somewhere to hold a Dharma assembly, can this be called accomplishment? Yes, it can. A Dharma assembly for accomplishment is what we often call a Dharma assembly today. Whether we hold a Dharma assembly or enter retreat, do these practices require examining the place? It is best to practice in a place that former great masters and accomplished ones have already examined and blessed. If a place has never been blessed by such masters and you search for one yourself, you may need to recite many scriptures beforehand. This is indeed necessary. Otherwise, it is difficult to know whether that place is truly suitable for you. Especially when you are preparing to establish a Dharma center. In Tibetan Buddhism, Chagme Rinpoche has specific teachings on examining the land. Perhaps Feng Shui is easier for you to understand. There are methods for examining the terrain. Although the Kalachakra teachings say that examining time and place is a kind of sign, for yogis with a very high level of realization, these things do not need to be examined. For them, every time is auspicious and every place is auspicious. But before we have reached such a level, we still need to examine the place. After examining it, one thing is that there will be no obstacles from humans or non-humans. For example, if we practice here, will the Dharma center be removed by the authorities? Or will I have conflicts with certain people? Or will there be mudslides or other problems from above, or various other obstacles? None of these unfavorable conditions should arise, and the place itself is auspicious. Whatever Dharma we practice, the 4 activities of pacifying, increasing, magnetizing, and subjugating all have different methods for examining the terrain. Generally speaking, examining the place is indeed necessary. But if a place has already been examined by great masters of the past, is there still a need to examine it? No, there is no need. Some Dharma friends ask, can I buy a house on the shady side of the mountain? Can I buy one on the sunny side? Do you think it will help my accomplishment? Could you examine it for me? I think both the shady side and the sunny side are places blessed by the first Dudjom Rinpoche, Jigme Ponsok Rinpoche, and so many members of the Sangha. Personally, I don't mind either way. Whether the door faces east or west, or whichever direction it faces, it makes no difference. I've never considered whether it is the sunny side or the shady side. It should be fine. However, in other places, if you want to establish a hermitage or Dharma center, then you should make some examination. If you really do not know how to examine such things, recite more of the 7-line prayer to Padmasambhava. When you first begin using the place, recite the verses of the 8 auspicious ones and the 7-line prayer to Padmasambhava. After that, the place can become auspicious and peaceful. For accomplishment, an auspicious place is still very important, especially when you practice a particular Dharma. The place where you practice is closely related to it. For example, our sacred land of Larung, as I mentioned before, according to the prophecies of some treasure revealers of the past, this place is a lotus land for accomplishing magnetizing activity. Because this place resembles a 6-petaled lotus and is extremely auspicious. This was also mentioned in the biography of His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche. This place is one for accomplishing magnetizing activity. Therefore, starting this year, we have begun reciting Wangdu, the Great Cloud of Blessings. After some time, if the conditions are complete, we will also raise red Buddhist prayer flags on the roofs of the meditation rooms, hermitages, or practice houses. When the conditions are complete, everyone can put them up as well. If the whole place relies on this color to spread the Dharma, there should be an inconceivable auspicious connection. This is something I have determined through conceptual analysis, inference, scriptural authority, and various forms of reasoning. This is one of the conditions relied upon for accomplishing enlightened activity. As I mentioned earlier, some accomplishments rely on mantras, recitation, and sacred substances. For example, when we want to accomplish magnetizing activity, it is not only something used for benefiting beings, it also allows us to truly gain mastery in our own accomplishment. Nowadays, many people's accomplishment does not succeed. As for myself, I'm still alive. For 20 or 30 years, I have been teaching the Dharma without encountering major obstacles. When I think about it, one reason is that since childhood, I have especially loved reciting the mantras and scriptures of Padmasambhava that dispel obstacles. At the same time, I have continuously recited the Padmashavari Vajra Armor, the Unbinding Mantra, and many other Mantrayana mantras without interruption. So I think one reason is that I have protected myself quite well. Although I may not have maintained my health very well, I have been well protected. Another reason, I think, is that the mantras taught by the great masters of the past are truly important. So when we engage in accomplishment, I also hope that many Dharma friends will rely on the blessings of the Dharma protectors in this age of decline. You should rely on Padmasambhava, Tara, many mantras, and their blessings. At the same time, sometimes you may also need to raise prayer flags and use a prayer wheel. Of course, in the ultimate nature of reality, everything is empty, and none of these truly exist. But honestly, speaking for myself, I have not reached that level. When I examine myself, back when I was teaching the root stanzas of the Middle Way, I felt as if I was just about to awaken, almost there, almost there. But at that moment, I still seem to be just a little short of that. This happens quite often. So I think that for many of us Dharma friends, although we know in theory that all phenomena are empty, before we have actually reached that level, we still need to rely on sacred objects and various supports. We need malas, prayer wheels, and Dharma texts. We also need to carry Buddha statues and blessed objects. All of these are necessary. The other day, I saw a university professor wearing many blessed objects around his neck. There were things like a liberation through wearing cord and a gau box, though you could not tell from the outside. He kept looking around, making sure no one was there, and said, "Please bless these for me." I wondered whether he had stolen something. Later, he took out many things and asked me to consecrate them. He was trembling with fear and kept looking around while I consecrated them. Afterward, I said, "You are actually quite good. As a university professor, it is good that you believe in these blessed objects. Quick, hide them away, or someone may come." So, what were we talking about just now? An auspicious place. Sometimes such a place is indeed necessary. This is what is meant by the fully endowed place. Second, the fully endowed time, whenever the time arrives for practitioners to engage in the accomplishment gathering, so they begin at an auspicious juncture of planetary alignments in order to practice. On an auspicious day, such as the 8th, 3rd, or 1st day of the Tibetan lunar month, and so on, if you begin on a fairly auspicious day, the accomplishment will come to completion. This lasts until the activities of great accomplishment are fully complete. That is called the fully endowed time, the fully endowed teacher. When you carry out a great accomplishment like this, you need a Vajra guru. And what are the qualifications of this guru? He has learned and mastered the scriptures of profound secret mantra and gained real ability, the power of the generation stage, the completion stage, and other supreme states of practice, so that he deserves the title of a Vajra king. A Vajra guru is not someone who writes his own biography, says I am such and such, and thereby actually becomes a Vajra guru. A genuine Vajra guru, on one hand, has mastered in theory the teachings of both sutra and secret mantra. In his practice, he has certain states of realization that set him apart from others. In the Great Chariot commentary on finding comfort and ease in the nature of mind, Longchenpa cited scriptural sources and explained 9 qualities of a secret mantra master. There it says that following the instruction of my root guru Kumaradza, one more point was added. The lineage must be free from corruption, making 9 points in total. Right? Didn't you all study this? I studied it and you studied it too. I didn't even look at the book, so why can't you remember? Is it 8 points or 9? 8 plus 1 makes 9. Huh? Look, Khenpo Jieji may not have very good teeth, but he still gnawed the answer out. Oh, now he feels embarrassed and has stopped smiling. He is the only one not smiling. Everyone else is laughing. The fully endowed retinue. Taking part in this secret mantra, great accomplishment under the Vajra master, are the regents, the dakas and dakinis, the subjugation masters, the chant leaders, and the guards. The guard is generally someone like a monastic administrator, and cooks, and so forth. If the accomplishment gathering lasts 7 days, 30-some days or so, then all the relevant personnel must be complete, and each of them must have their own level of realization and qualities. If they have no level of realization at all, and only hold these titles in name, such as this one is the subjugation master, this one is the precept recitation master, and so on, that would not be reasonable. Even the cook needs to have some skill. The food should be prepared well, and they should not quarrel with others every day. Otherwise, that would not be proper either. So each person must be qualified. For example, this is also true for a 7-day practice or a Dharma assembly. All the gurus and disciples who participate must each possess their own qualities. The male and female practitioners worthy of gathering in this profound mandala will enter into a group formation equal to the enumerations of deities to be accomplished. For instance, if one practices the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities, such as the 42 peaceful deities, then there are 100 deities in total. At that time, there would also be 100 male and female practitioners. Such a practice does exist. But regarding this, Jigme Pansok Rinpoche once said that this is simply stated in the ritual manual for the sake of auspicious connection. In fact, whether there are more or fewer people does not really matter. For instance, when we hold the Vidyadhara Dharma assembly, there is no special rule about the number of male or female participants. It is only in certain particular secret mantra practices that there are such auspicious connections and requirements. What is this called? The fully endowed retinue. After this, there is no mention of the fully endowed Dharma. The 5th is the fully endowed substances, restorative food. For example, if you are going to practice for 7 days, the food and supplies needed for those 7 days must all be prepared beforehand. If someone happens to become ill during that time, the necessary medicines for treating illness, the required materials, as well as the substances and dharma texts for accomplishment, must all be prepared. Once you have truly entered retreat, it would not be appropriate to say, I forgot my dharma text, so I need to leave the retreat. The materials needed for accomplishment, including ambrosia pills, ritual implements, and so on, must all be complete. These 4 kinds of support must be fully gathered without any omission. When these five fully endowed circumstances are present, the profound practice of accomplishment occurs through the four aspects of approach and accomplishment. First, for the four branches, the approach means the way in which the deity is pleased. Now, as for this approach, at the very beginning, there is taking refuge, generating bodhicitta, reciting the ritual, making supplications, and continuously reciting mantras. This entire process is the preliminary practice within the four branches of approach and accomplishment, and it is called the approach. The whole process works through invoking the deity. The deity is not like some Dharma friends who are happy one moment and unhappy the next. The deity is not like that. But on the level of auspicious connection and appearances, by making offerings and confessing before the deity, we can dispel our own karmic obscurations. Therefore, the deity may also appear to be pleased or displeased. This is just like what is taught in reciting the Medicine Buddha Sutra. Within the Dharmadhatu, all Buddhas originally have no joy or anger. But on the level of appearances, in order to tame and guide beings, they manifest expressions of joy and anger. Therefore, the deities being pleased is like this, and the gurus being pleased is the same. From that, the close approach is when the accomplishment of siddhi is imminent. You practice for 7 or 8 days, reciting mantras and the ritual. This is called the approach. Finally, you draw close to accomplishment. The path of preparation has been completed, and the process of drawing near the path of seeing is called the close approach. After that, siddhi is then received. When the moment of true siddhi finally arrives, that is called the accomplishment. This complete accomplishment constitutes what is called the great accomplishment. At the end, the entire process of truly receiving siddhi is called the great accomplishment. Generally, for example, when we hold a Vidyadhara Dharma assembly, the entire stage is often practiced for about 15 days. From the first day until about the 14th day, the whole process belongs to the approach. Then come the close approach, the accomplishment, and the great accomplishment. Especially from the final evening until the next morning, when the Dharma assembly is about to end, we often speak of receiving siddhi, and that moment of receiving siddhi is called the great accomplishment. So the way this is divided here is slightly different from some ordinary forms of practice. This is something everyone should understand clearly. Next, we will explain the 4 branches of approach and accomplishment in a little more detail. In order to dispel obstacles, first, when you begin to practice, whether you are entering retreat or engaging in practice, the outer boundaries are set. For instance, you visualize a 10-spoke Dharma wheel, and within each spoke you visualize one of the 10 great wrathful Vajra deities. And you also use the mantras of the Buddhas of the 5 families to confer blessing. We often call this visualizing the protection wheel. This is the outer boundary. At this point, some ritual manuals also include the suppressing of samaya violators and the setting of the inner boundaries. In reality, this means cutting through conceptual thoughts, because conceptual thoughts are the demons. As a yogi, one rests in the state free of concepts. The mandala is erected. In addition, preparation of the mandala, deities, Vajra master, substances, and disciples are the 5 preliminaries. For example, when holding a Vidyadhara Dharma assembly, the mandala must be prepared the day before. The deity and the deity's seed syllable must also be visualized clearly. Many symbolic marks are arranged on the mandala. As for the guru, for example, the Vajra guru who presides over the Dharma assembly, he first relies on the mandala to receive empowerment and then rests in samadhi, and so on. If the practice is to begin the next day, there are also many such requirements for him as the Vajra guru. There are also requirements for the sacred substances, such as the vas, which must contain 25 sacred substances. These 25 include the 5 medicines, the 5 ambrosias, the 5 sacred substances, and so on. If it is the unsurpassed inner secret mantra, then the 5 meats and the essence of the 5 bodhicittas are added as well. These are also needed. As for the disciples, they too are visualized as qualified vessels suitable for the mandala and so on. These are called the 5 preliminaries: the mandala, the deity, the guru, the sacred substances, and the disciples. All of these must be prepared in advance. As for these preparations, nowadays we may have something similar. Next is the actual practice. The great-bellied earth god is subdued, and the place of his abdomen is blessed. The illustrative mandala is drawn, and the accomplishment substances are arranged. Furthermore, All other substances are blessed according to the manual. This is the actual practice. As we explained earlier when discussing the mandala, these are all found in the special ritual manuals for great accomplishment. But I think that for many people, carrying this out oneself may be rather difficult. When we practice on our own or go into retreat by ourselves, we must understand the basic methods of retreat clearly. Previously, I taught something called the essential points of retreat, where I gave everyone a general introduction to a very simple method of retreat. When conditions allow in the future, we will still need to explain how someone entering retreat should set the outer and inner boundaries, what kinds of tormas and food offerings they should have, and what else they should prepare, such as the va, spell, vajra, and so on. They should still have the various conditions required in secret mantra. When we do tsok offerings or other practices in the future, we also need a simple ritual. These simple forms of conduct and ceremony are indispensable. When conditions allow in the future, we also cannot focus entirely on study and reflection, with no practice or ceremony at all. As Confucius said, there is its own culture and history behind ceremony. Especially now, in many places in the Han region, people place great importance on outer forms. In places like Hong Kong and Taiwan, groups of people gather day after day, holding hand drums and going ding dong again and again. It's hard to say whether they are actually engaging in genuine visualization practice. In any case, there may be 10 lay practitioners or 5 lay practitioners, all wearing 5 Buddha crowns and then dancing. There are all kinds of things like this. These are also some of the unique conducts in secret mantra. Reciting mantras and making various offerings to the mandala, as well as entering and receiving empowerment, are the stages of the conclusion. Everything up until this point constitutes the stage of approach. Then, by having maintained the practice through effort in recitation and meditation, to see the sign of the approaching accomplishment of siddhi is the close approach to the deity. For instance, if a 15-day assembly has been held, then the entire earlier process of making offerings, reciting the ritual, receiving empowerments, and so on, is called the approach. Within this approach, it is further divided into 3 aspects: the preliminary, the actual practice, and the conclusion. Then, after meditating and practicing fully and properly, in the end, you truly discover certain signs of accomplishment. The signs that you are about to leave the path of ordinary beings and attain the state of a Vidyadhara are called the close approach, so the requirements for this are quite high. Then if the deity is peaceful, one can transform this into a wrathful deity. This can dispel obstacles, increase the power of one's practice, and so on, so it is necessary. Or whatever deity has been practiced, whether peaceful or wrathful, through concentration on the radiation and reabsorption of the deity. The light radiated from the deity appears in different colors for pacifying, increasing, magnetizing, and subjugating, such as white, yellow, red, and blue. The light radiates to make offerings to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and also shines throughout the 6 realms of samsara and so on. Then comes the reabsorption of the light. And mantra recitation, all desirable things such as food, drink, ornaments, and clothing are utilized as empty bliss. Through this practice that pleases the deity with dance and various gestures of mudra and the rest, especially when holding a tsok offering, at that time all the male and female yogis wear all kinds of extraordinary yogic garments, sing Vajra songs, perform Vajra dances, and so on, bringing joy to the deity and to all the Vidyadharas present. When the signs of siddhi are firm and apparent, that is the accomplishment. They are stable and will not change. At that time, earlier, there were signs of approaching accomplishment, but now one has attained very stable signs of accomplishment. This is called accomplishment. The subsequent receiving of siddhi is the great accomplishment. One practices for the duration of a single night from sunset until the break of dawn. Having practiced the path of radiation and reabsorption during the time of initial darkness, siddhi is received from the deity. Certain specific secret mantra rituals also include this practice. By practicing the path of liberation in the middle of the night, siddhi is received from the enemy. By practicing the path of union at the break of dawn, siddhi is received from the consort. Through these 3, the siddhis of the enlightened body, speech, and mind of the deities of the mandala are all received. By relying upon this accomplishment gathering, illustrative and genuine wisdom is gradually invoked. At the very beginning, as explained in The Beacon of Certainty, there are 3 different kinds of wisdom. First, At the beginning, one brings forth an illustrative wisdom that is somewhat similar to non-dual wisdom. Then in the middle, genuine wisdom becomes manifest. And thereby one abides on the ground of the Aryas. At that time, one truly attains the state of avidyadhara. If the initial realizations have been attained, then the later ones will continue to increase up to the ground of union with no further learning, all the way up to the state of Buddhahood, his qualities increasing more and more, and the 4 Vidyadharas will be achieved. All right, we will stop here for today.
Bandhangara Badma Sodargye Bandhangara Badma Sodargye Bandhangara Badma Sodargye